and welcome to another podcast on food. And in the last podcast, I talked about food as medicine and energy. And interestingly enough, we are today having, on a global setting, March 9th, 2023. So that's a whole month that has passed by since I made the last podcast on food. So with that, of course, a month has passed by and things have played out and circumstances have changed and reality has changed. And in the progression work and our clearing work, we work through different layers of our perception field that allows us to tap into older forms of knowledge as well as leading to a different perception of reality, because past, present, and future are connected via the emotional field that goes through these three horizontal levels of past, present, and future as we clear out our timelines to release the benevolent progressive energies of our heart field, which then sparks up high and below into the vertical direction, activating our mind field with the purpose of altering our biofield as we cross-section the high vibrational state of our heart field, as well as activating the higher levels of our mind fields. And with that are able to begin to re-engineer and restore our biofield codes. And that's where food comes in, because we can say there are different approaches to how we work with food. And here, I'm not going to rely on sciences. I'm not going to rely on what people are saying out there. I'm not going to rely on what the New Age community says healthy or unhealthy, whether you should fast or not, or whether you should eat this herb or not, or whether you're going to do these supplements or not, and all of these great ideas that are out there, which for all reasons and purposes, all could be right or all could be wrong or could be in between. So what I want to do here instead, because all of you beautiful people out there, you can look that up for yourself. Just go onto the internet and see what's good for you and what's not. You can do it scientifically, or you can go with the alternative community version of it. All depends on how you want to approach this. And that's where I want to go in, talk a little bit about food and the actual emotional connection it has, the belief systems and ideas that are connected to it, and how we can kind of approach our use and production of food in terms of nutrition. Because again, when we talk about nutrition, what we know what is nutritious is what science has told us. And if we go with the big kind of devil's advocate and here say, well, what if everything they say is actually part of the prohibiting programs? Then it pushes us into investigate things on our own. It pushes us into, okay, if I am to get the answer of this one, how am I going to approach the work with food? And for me, I will say there are probably, if we go with the idea that everything is frequency based, we can also discuss whether or not that's a made up system. But let's play with that one, because that is what science tells us. And within that scope of paradigm and scope of ideas and paradigm, sorry about that, then if we say that the way they measure nutrition will then be measured within the scope of a frequency spectrum that goes with their perception, their paradigms of biology. And you might recall from some of my older material in the whole advanced class 3, where I talk about that, do we really know that the body works the way it does? And this is where we go into science of medicine, that is kind of the Western science, even actually also Indian as well as, or Asian and original American people, the Native Americans, or the original people of the 12 tribes that used to inhabit the continent that we now call America, how they addressed the physical form and how they perceived health and how they perceive food and how they perceive reality. And there are signs in very ancient cultures, no matter where on the planet, that they were working with the body in different ways to try and release ailments, whether it was via the shaman that released it from the astral plane, the entities, which we talk about energetic parasites or old great creatures or elemental beings or whatever kind of level that we're working on. Typically the astral emotional field is connected to the biofield. And as long as we are under the reincarnational cycles or the enclosure prohibiting programs, well, then the body, due to wrongful use of energy and wrongful use of consciousness and wrongful use of our original energy system and wrongful use of the environmental energies of the outer domain, not really doing the clearing work that we are here to do, which I talk about in other course material, well, then we do produce distortion energies, and that leads to ailment, and that leads to disease, and that leads to death. Wrongful use of energy leads to distortion, which leads to disease, which leads to death. So the right approach here is not to think that food in itself is a healing tool, but to understand that food and health and environment and our bodies are interconnected, and it all goes with our fields to begin with. So that's an important thing to understand, that with what science have done, as well as the New Age have done as well, which we see with the use of crystals and tarot cards and all sorts of shenanigans, including foods and herbs and different forms of supplements, and coming up with new supplements. This is so healthy for you, or these crystals will enhance your perception field or activate your ascension process, or whatever it is. We're using tools to get there. We're using crutches. And food and crystals and ideas and belief systems are then all tailored around the myth of this is good for you, this is healthy for you. So a lot of that is astral and emotional based, and it's also based upon mental belief systems and ideas of health or what have you. And we should investigate when we have some kind of food, which of course can be addictive because it has different forms, as we know, for instance, coffee and caffeine, which we find caffeine in tea as well. That can be addictive. Similar to cigarettes hold nicotine, which is a natural element, by the way, in soil, whether or not we should have it, or it's part of prohibiting technologies, or it's part of the downsizing of our physical form, keeping us stuck in what we could call the frequency spectrum by the food that we're ingesting, by the means that we're using, as well as our emotional response to it, as well as our mental constructions around it, ties us into different programs. So I think that's important to investigate that when we talk about that this is healthy for you, the cellular salt are healthy for you. Are they? Or is it some kind of a belief system, a construction, a program that you're tapping into and become part of due to the low participation? Is it really? Or is it a way to uphold the frequency spectrum of your physical form that you're now trying to work out of, getting back to the original density 1 configuration, where your physical form is completely dependent on your energy system and what you do to your energy system and how you work with your energy system. And in that world of the original civilizations, they did not eat, they did not drink, they did not ingest anything. They were not depending on getting energy from outer sources. So we could say that's kind of whether it happened during the colonizations 15,000 years ago, or it happened during the times of Atlantis, or it was seeded in the times of Atlantis using tools to gain something, which then spun out of control and eventually came into this whole that we need outer sources to do anything, or that's part of the enslavement program. So we don't really get empowered and stand sovereign because we're always thinking, oh, I need this or that or what have you to get that kind of balance, to get that kind of health. We must also investigate, where does these ideas and desires come from? Are they based upon fear? Fear of death, fear of ailment, fear of disease, fear of no longer being young and youthful and pretty, wanting longevity, fear of dying, whatever's going on. And all of these fears, all of these emotional reactions, aside from electrochemical processes, begins with energetic parasites. It ties into the distortion energies, and it ties into past lives, and it ties into concepts of who and what we are in this life and how we perceive ourselves, which goes with different types of constitutional, to put it that way, constructions of society. Cultural constructions of what is beauty, what is health, how are we supposed to look. And there's a lot of that in the New Age industry, which people are overlooking, that the New Age industry, they are no longer seeing it as what it actually is has become an industry, and perhaps even were to begin with, it might even be a program that were put in there to prolong the old world order control systems, taking us down paths and rabbit holes of false spirituality, which we can say, well, what is real spirituality and what is false spirituality? Is there even a real spirituality? And that's a very good question as well. So these are some of the investigations we should do when we talk about food, and not just jump on board the latest hype of this is good for you or this is healthy or whatever it is. Stand a little bit cynical and discern a little bit. I talk about some of these mechanics in some of my other material, and this is where I say, well, can't you just put it all in one place? No, unfortunately not, because I have to go into the different boxes. And here we're looking at things from an angle of food, which means that the way we operate our emotional field and the way we operate our mental field must then be within the context of food, and not in the other material where I work with the emotional field and the mental field in context of the transformative energy system, or as part of within the context of how to actually work it as part of the psychological matrix. So we have to work with these things from a different angle and understand it from these different angles to get the full Trinity picture. Because remember, we work with trinities here. Always work with trinities as long as we're working with the 3 lower fields, the 6-layered energy system, and the 3 higher fields that goes with the templates. So these are 12 different layers we're working our way through, and we're working within the higher and the lower and the middle section that is the 6-layered energy system. And the 6-layered energy system is divided into 2 layers, which goes with the hexagonal merge of the upper and the lower triangles. But we have the 3 lower fields that are kind of what we call the earth triangle or the enclosure triangle, the trinity of the bio, the emotional, and the mental field. That's the first trinity we need to work with and technically dissolve as 3 layers, but merge them into one integrated, unified, full functional 3-field merged code system that can then connect to the higher order energy system. And that's where we have our true capacities in the 6-layered transformative energy system that then begins to transform everything we are as a process of transformation of energy, to clear out distortion, to clear out past timelines, to clear out our connection points to whatever is of the racial grids that's part of the code systems, which we call timelines, and onward and so forth. And I touch ground with these dynamics somewhere else. So in the end, all of these different approaches and understandings of what we are dealing with is in complex information systems. That's why we need to address it one piece at a time, from one angle at a time, and work with it. When we say food, we work with that understanding by having studied the other sciences, and by that can connect the dots and tie it into our understanding of when we work with food. Well, then what is food in the context of the different approaches, as well as within the context of the biofield and the body itself? And what does that then mean? And the way I want to approach this is tying into 2 levels of past lives as well. One, again, I'm getting more and more memories from my time as this Buddhist monk that lived in rural Tibet, died in 1959. So if I don't know what age I was, I don't see myself particularly old. I would say 35 or 40, perhaps not even 40, perhaps 30, 35. So that kind of goes around a date of birth around 1920 or 1925, 1930, something like that. At least what we could say, either prior to the First World War or during the times of First World War or after the First World War, but definitely before the Second World War. So I don't know that exactly. But if we go with that idea, then we can say, well, if I go into the mind and the self understanding, the way I perceive reality and myself without having this high notion of me and myself, because that rural community would build up differently, I tap into some of my understandings of food and how I perceive food. For instance, tea, which came to me today when we talk about black tea or we talk about green tea. today green tea as part of the New Age community has been hyped up to be something that's very exclusive, and that's for health and have all of these benefits. And I recall it as in, yes, the black tea were for the ruling class, and the laymen or the monks and the poor people, they could drink green tea, because there you can literally go out into the field. You could grow it yourself. You could go into the field and you could pluck it, you could dry it, and then you could make tea out of it. So that was for the laymen. So that was for the poor people. Green tea were for the poor people, as I recall it. But I also have memories that goes with whether they're real or not, whether they're engineered or not. I have a lot of memories being both the medicine woman of the original 12 tribes of the original land, which we now call America, as well as living in somewhere in Europe, living as part of, in the Middle Ages, being a wise woman. I'll not call it a witch because that's a word that's been put on later on, but living in the woods, dealing with the really very astral plane-ish, working with the nature divas, trolls, fairies, all of these things, which I now talk about in one of my podcasts that are put, for now it's put on the Higher Order Energetic Systemic Awareness Forum YouTube channel, where I talk about that these nature beings actually are fragments of original civilizations that used to live here long before the colonization, and that as we got colonized by the Dracos, chose to let go of their physical form and then continued in their holographic energetic form, and eventually became astral as part of the distortion fields, because they tried to connect to people and work with people, and to some degree also connected to some of the old magicians of the Atlantean branch that used the different type of reality energies, try to manifest them into organic forms, and onward and so forth. It's a long story, but that ties into some of the understandings of magic, how these original civilizations lost the ability to have physical form, chose not to become insectoids, but chose to float around the distortion fields and became part of what we understand as the astral plane. So there are all of these understandings, and my work with these has always been to release them. But some of them chose to go into plants and continued being connected to the plant kingdom, especially if they had origin of the original transformative sciences that were part of the Pleiadians, creating this reality field with plants as the huge transformers of what we could call earth energies, combining earth and water and air as part of the plants, and the transformative features, typically what we call fire, and that is in humans connected to the mental field, which is interestingly enough, whereas our emotional field is connected to the water, the fluidity, the horizontal level with waves and oscillation. That is what we are seeing in the water in the ocean, that has the same feature, and the earth energies is the biofield that goes with the codes of the biofield, which then goes with the mineral level, that are technically connected to trolls and rocks that are solidified original holographic reality field components that are now solidified and is crystallized into different crystalline structures. So when we talk about nutrition and we talk about the elements in the different types of food that we are eating, we're talking about minerals, as science call it, but we are talking about crystalline structures of original reality field energy units. So that's a different understanding of what we're eating, including some of what we see as the heavy metals, or the elements that are within what we call metals. Quite a lot of these are actually remnant solidified energy units of ancient crafts that used to be higher dimensional, that landed here, got stuck in the in-between states of the solidification, the enclosure program, as well as how our reality lost the ability to be part of the density energy of the outer domain. So they were in between, as we have a section that's purely outer domain, which we're trying to get back to, but there were also the in-between states that were connected to our transformative energy system as part of the restoration programs. And as these got shut down and we were transferred to the artificial fourth and the artificial fifth dimension of the hijackers, well, what was left in the original fourth and the original fifth then began to lose its viability rate because we were no longer attending it, and it began to solidify due to the dynamics of the timeline event, and by that became part of what we call the physical matter reality that we are connected to. including having what we call features of frequency energies that allows these to solidify inside our reality. But that's also the foundation of crystals. Crystals are having the original outer domain grid features in it as part of fire, the transformative elements of it. And that's what people are sensing into. This rock, this crystal can transform. It can work with my energies in a transformative way. But we add in the belief system and the astral fear or the astral desire or the astral needs, which are emotionally based inside this physical form, this does good to me. We value it. We give it attributes it actually doesn't have. So we need to strip all of that emotional distortion away from it. And oh, it's pretty, or it's this, or whatever we have of emotional astral, features that gives it a kind of label that are interpretable as we interpret it within our value system, what's good or bad, or our belief systems, or what we've been told, or people saying, oh, I'm sensing this is good for this or that or whatever, similar with herbs, and break it down to its crystalline structure, its code structure. And there begin to understand the similarity of that code structure in our own physicality, going with the original programs of undoing the effects of the timeline event. So food, crystals, herbs, all the remedies of the New Age culture that goes with our physical form. I'm not here talking about tarot cards, but crystals can definitely affect our physical form because they can connect to our energy field and there begin to release their transformative dynamics. But we cannot use the transformative dynamics as they are being explained. If you go into any crystal shop or any crystal market or whatever, you will say, oh, this is rosa quartz or this is obsidian or whatever it's called. It doesn't matter what it's called. It's just a label. But then beneath, you have all of these features. Oh, this makes you feel more comfortable, or this calms you down, or this gives you the enhancement, or this makes you more rich, or whatever it is. These are all psychological traits. These are all traits of desire-based ideas of what we want to become, similar to when you go into the fashion industry. If you buy this product, if you buy this piece of clothes, you will look like this. You have this brand. You can go out and say, oh, I'm dressed in Hugo Boss or whatever label that's out there, because there's so many new ones. Remember, I'm old school, so I don't know what's going on out there right now because I don't buy into that type of coach stream and programming, because clothes is clothes and it just needs to keep me warm. It needs to be functional. It needs to not get ruined too quickly. It has to have some kind of, we could call longevity. It has some kind of long-term use. It doesn't break down too quickly and it's not polluting environment, and it's as much as possible with the clothes industry, pollutes as little as possible, which we know is kind of difficult, and onward and so forth. So it goes with sustainability ideas. It goes with not to be overly priced, because why pay so much just because it's a brand, right? It doesn't make it, at least when I was younger, if it were a brand, it normally had a better quality, but not today. Everything's produced in China or India or wherever, where things are not that expensive. And today it's no longer about quality. It's about profit, and it's about producing as much as possible. So as much as possible can be sold. And unfortunately, also produce a lot of garbage that needs the things that needs to be thrown away. We have a production and thrown away culture, completely wrongful use of resources. So that's the way I kind of look at clothes, and saying, okay, at least I buy something that's not overly expensive and I recycle as much as possible, or I wear it out completely and then I toss it. And here in Denmark, as you know, whatever we toss into the bin will then be burned and used as heating. We have these huge facilities where we burn our garbage and then we're pumping it out as heat into the radiators of our home, which are fueled, based upon water actually. And then the heat comes in and heat up the water, and then it warms up our houses, which are also built with a high level of insulation to keep the heat, and as well as keeping out the cold. And in summertime, until the bricks are warmed up, it actually also keeps our houses cool, but But once the bricks and the walls are warmed up, well, then everything is kept warm, which is a little bit of a nuisance during summertime, which again means that our housings are built for cold environment and not the heat that will come in the north in the future. So we will eventually, of course, have to change the way we build houses. But back to food. So the whole point of understanding when we work with food, one level of it is to strip us of all of these belief systems and emotional connections to whatever we are ingesting. And then strip it all down to, yes, of course it can taste nice. It doesn't have to taste of crap. But what I have experienced as well as I clear more and more of my emotional field, yes, there will always be layers that can be cleared out. There are always, and this whole kind of never say never and never say always and these kind of things. But for me, it's an ongoing, perpetuating, repeating cycle of things that surfaces that needs to be cleared out. So it's not the Ouroboros. It's about getting into the spiral dynamics where we clear from low to high. Once we reach the highest level, either transmuted or reintegrated and then amplified, which will then open up another layer to be cleared out, activated, cleaned out, transformed, elevated, transmuted, or let go of, or integrated. And then another layer comes up, and it goes on and on and on, because our complex energy systems are complex and there's so many layers in it. So it, for us within this reality, does feel as a forever ongoing process, which I then, for the sake of easiness, just say always. So I could, again, as I talk about the Native Americans, I could say these are the original 12 tribes of the original land that was designated to this group of Pleiadian, Syrian, Arcturian, or whatever race there used to be that were reseeded after the time of Atlantis, which is a very long sentence every time I speak, including saying that we have this ongoing, perpetuating, reappearing cycle of constant clearing work until we get onto the progression spiral. And there we can begin to discard these levels of energies, which will then lead to elevation and progression. As long as we are in that process of clearing, it might feel as if it is always. So I use it here as an understanding. It's an ongoing process. As well as you can say there are certain things that will be an ongoing process of clearing of our emotional field and mental field, as long as we're inside the enclosure, as long as we're tied to the reincarnation programs. Even though we do disconnect, there are so many lives that needs to be cleared out that it feels as if it never ends. Again, that's an emotional value to it. But for me, it's just kind of, when I use these expressions, I don't get bogged down by it. I don't get depressed by it. I'm just seeing this is an ongoing process, and I'm not deluding myself by trying to tinker with the words and say, oh, this will end at some point. Yes, but as long as we're inside the enclosure, things are going on entire lifetime. So even though we say to ourselves, well, nothing ever lasts forever. Yes, that's a good little mental trick. It's also a good calming trick to balance yourself out so you don't get absorbed into catastrophe thinking or victimized thinking, saying tomorrow will be another day and nothing lasts forever. Everything will change. This will change too. I just don't know when. And we can do that little trick every time. Or we could just, sorry about that, be completely calm and just say, this is how it is. This is reality, and not get emotionally upset by it. So that ties into some of the training I had of my past lives, both as a medicine woman, but also as a Buddhist monk. And that's why for me, I'm cool with saying this goes on forever, because in the beginning, I did have all these feelings of stress around it, or disaster, or victimization as I did my awakening process. And there, these tools are good to have when we're working our way through the emotional field, into the astral plane, and into the belief systems that we have that are being imbued into us via the social constructions, via our experiences, and going through the trauma that we have, learning to be in trauma and learning not to be affected to the same degree by trauma, where words and concepts and ideas and how we label things are very important. But at some point, it flips out of that, and then it doesn't become important anymore. Similar when I talk about the emotional field, clearing most of that out has taken away my taste. So for me, there are certain things I can still taste as being good quality, and I do enjoy good quality like everybody else. But if the price is too high, then there's greed involved in that product. And then I don't want to eat greed, no matter how nice it tastes. because I don't want to get connected to that thought form. Because every product, everything that we have inside this reality is connected to some field of some sort. It's connected to whatever product you buy has a thought form behind it. It has a faction behind it. It has some kind of what we could say emotional, mental load to it. And we buy into that when we buy the product. There is an exchange rate, which I talk about in the business course material. There's an exchange rate to everything that is physical, emotional, mental, as well as energetic in terms of reality energies. Nothing is just this or just that. It's not just a cup. Just look at the cup, or I'm looking at the cup I bought in IKEA. IKEA is a concept in itself. When I buy the IKEA cup, I buy into the concept of IKEA. I'm trying very much to avoid the whole architectural, the different designers and all of their ideas of what a home is or shouldn't be. And when you buy this, you get this package or this idea, and you can identify yourself with it and say, oh, this is an IKEA home, or this is a designer home, or this is this, or this is that, whatever. We have that with our home as well, where we buy into the ideas of the designers. And whether these designers are dark ones or reseeded from Atlantis or of the fourth cycle or Arturians or whatever they are, then we have the code systems behind everything that we have. Our computers, our phones, our cups, our clothes, our cars, the food we buy, the coffee, the tea, the chocolate, whatever we buy, the herbs, the spices. Everything has an astral element or component to it that ties into different levels of the distortion fields. It has a mental construction behind it. It has an architecture or an idea, which is technically a template that is connected to different levels of a reality field, whether it's the artificial fourth and fifth dimension that then ties in to these levels and concepts and code systems and light language within the artificial fifth often is referred to as cold light or false light, which is part of the artificial fourth. So false light is part of artificial fourth, cold light is part of the artificial fifth. And there you understand light is not just light, but it goes with the original light that goes with the vibrational field and transformative features, or it goes with what looks like as light, but only connects to code streams that are artificial and leads to the code programs. That's the false light. Whereas we talk about mental constructions that are built in cold light, connects to the artificial fifth, connects to what we call the falling angelics that are part of the races and the groups that were part of Atlantis. Some of the falling angelics are fourth dimensional, others are fifth dimensionals. So that's the cold light, where the different light codes are connected to the artificial fifth, where there's no vibration. That's what makes it cold. It has stopped transforming things. It is just keeping things stuck in a specific crystalline structure. That's why it's cold. So these are the things we need to focus on when we talk about food and when we talk about what's healthy and what's not, that even though we get the ideas from the different programs that are out there, that thyme is healthy for instance, lung infection. Some of the monks in the old monasteries within the Christian communities came up with quite a lot of the things we see in herbs today have been labeled by the monks within the Christian communities. So the question is this a Baal construction of what is healthy and what's not? Giving the monks a kind of tool from where they could trade with the community around them, from where they could get access into both having this belief of God, but also at the same time had the medicine to assist their belief system. So putting that one in play when we talk about the medicinal features of herbs that we are working with in the Western world. We have different features in China with different types of herbs that they can grow in their local environment within their jurisdiction that is attributed to the way that they see health, as we know with the 5 elements, that they tie their herbs and their ideas of what is healthy, including acupuncture, into that Chinese medicinal system. We have a different type of the Ayurvedic system in India that is tied to astrology. So once we begin to investigate that a herb can have different features, similar as we have the constellations in the sky, all depending on what system of astrology you work within, it has different attribution. It has different features. It has different effects, that which tells us that, yes, we might believe that thyme is healthy for that, but no, it's not, because how come different people on different places on the earth attribute different type of health qualities to it? That means that we are putting it into it. We are giving it these qualities similarly as we're doing with crystals. So that's the first where we begin to talk about this is good for us or this is healthy for us. We need to investigate it. We need to investigate our own emotional astral belief systems that are floating around within our cultural concepts of what is healthy and what's not. And the fears and the desires and the things that we have behind it that allures us into belief that if I drink this, if I eat this, if I do this, then I'll become more healthy. Then my body will be more functional, and completely overlooking the programs that are behind it and tapping in and participating in these programs. As well as understanding that as it's said in the esoterics, the soul is the healer. The 6-layer transformative energy system is what will heal you, is what will transform you. And as long as you're only using the crutches and the tools without having activated the higher order energy system, you can eat as many vitamins as possible, technically. You can do whatever. You can use as many tools as possible. But if you have karma that goes with negative traumatic situation of past life, if you have got distortion codes that ties up to clone programs, if you have got anything that connects you to some of the timelines of Atlantis and you're still here paying off the deeds that you did of dark magic back then, all of these tools will no longer have an effect because they will be overridden by what's in your energy system. So when we talk about that, when we go with your understanding of Dharma and Karma, where we understand you living this life, experience this life to transform whatever you have brought with you from past existences, be it good or bad, because you can have positive karma as well. The capacities are what we learned, which we're reintegrating and using as tools in this life. And karma, aside from clearing out, is also about remembering. So to connect yourself to everything you have been, so you can continue your progression journey in the outer domain of clearing past timelines, code streams, code sequences, everything that's part of your higher order energy system. So that can be cleared and become permeable and cease to exist. And then you will lift it all up into your template level, the 3 layers of your template level, which will then, as it's said in the esoterics, is the causal body that builds everything into what we call permanent atoms. There are 3 little dots, so to speak, in your template that absorbs all of your knowledge and all of your complex code systems into that little orb that will leave this system once the time is ready and once you have done what you need to do and get out into the original holographic reality, which in my perception is what is called Nirvana. So getting out of the system completely and not being reborn. So that's my perception of it. And it's not going strongly against the way I perceive some of the energy exercises I did as part of the monastery in the little rural community I lived in that were close to the Chinese border, wherever that was, because it's in a different language and I don't speak Tibetan today and I don't speak Chinese either. So even though I hear the sound in my mind, I wouldn't know what it is because I don't speak these languages anymore. Similar to in next lives, if I get so, and I think back to this life here as part of Denmark, with the city I live in is called Måløv, but if I in next life are incarnated or become part of a physical form in a community that has lost the ability to speak this language, Danish ceased to exist because Denmark is no longer on the map, well, then it would be a foreign language I wouldn't understand, as we've seen with many of the ancient languages. So there's no point in trying to pursue where was it, where's the locality. I'll stumble upon it if I have unfinished business there. But since what I remember of that life was very happy and calm and serene. And it was just the end of it when I got engaged in the freedom movement against the Chinese ruling factions and dealing with that, and died in China somewhere. Well, then the remains of me, the body that is left somewhere in China in a mass grave, along with others that have met the same disastrous exit. That's the only thing I technically need to clear, and I don't really need to go there physically. I can do that on the timeline, because what's left is the code, the remnant, the echo that needs to be cleared, and not the physical body that will deteriorate and cease to exist eventually. It's everything else. Hence my solution at the time of death, to go into the void and dissolve as much as possible, so nothing would linger on and I wouldn't be reborn in some kind of crappy body in China, because I still, for some odd reason, knew that that was a piece of possibility they had. Today I would attribute it to the alien technology they have access to in China. Okay, so with that understanding, when we're talking about health and food, for those of you who choose to work with food as a nutritionist or as a dietist, or working with people trying to make them, help them, assist them, produce programs for them of better ways of eating, or choose to become a restaurant owner, or choose to work with herbs, or choose to work with any forms that can kind of create what we call better health or nutrition in a manner where food is your product to work with. There are the understandings of the different layers of what we're dealing with that needs to be really mastered to a large degree. And then at the same time, we also need to work with the new sciences that will come our way as part of the outer domain, as part of the transition period, where we understand that when we do work with food as a nutritional aspect to our physicality, it is on the code level, it is on the holographic level behind what we're dealing with, and it is to undo the crystallization of it. So we begin the process of generating less distortion, because distortion is what ties us to the enclosure. That's very important, because the more distortion we create, the more we create energy patterns in our emotional field, the more we create mental concepts that ties us into a rebirth, so to speak, because we have mental constructions we think is the real reality, but these are crystallization of our radiation field that turns us into cold light, that fixates us to the artificial fifth, that fixates us to the frequency fence, that fixates us to what we call the neural network that is crystalline energy of the original outer domain variety. Then we have the emotional aspect of it, all the things we put into this, our fears, our unknown concepts of value systems and subconscious material, past life, karma, that goes into what we call distortion energy. That's where the vibrational energy, instead of transforming it because we have fixated ourselves into certain belief systems, then begins to create patterns that are solidified via our fixated belief systems, via our wrongful use of energy, because we want to cling on to that fixated belief system. And with that, create distortion energy that then creates what we understand as distorted energy that amplifies the vibrational field, which then shuts down our emotional field or the heart field, and then turns us into the emotional field. And by that, ties us into the astral plane, from where we can say this matter form, this physical matter form inside the enclosure will then have a greater chance of being reproduced and reborn. Because what ties us into rebirth are our mental constructions, and what we cling on to, as well as our distortion fields that will drag us into, once we have a male and a female that in their sexual activity merges their fields and are opening up the gates for a rebirth of someone, then what we have got in our emotional field, what we have got of mental constructions, will tie us and get us sucked into the joint fields of these two people, because there is a match. So the whole process of letting go of these concepts and ideas and emotional value systems and distortion energies and emotional reactions based upon whatever subconscious material we have for fear or desire or needs to things to be pleasant or unpleasant, the whole work with food must be scraped down to the basic understanding of working with whatever we're working with is a matter of transformation of energy. So food and beverages and whatever we're dealing with should be seen from that level of transformational properties. Can it transform this physical form? The energies, the crystallization of it, as in when we talk about, for instance, thyme. I don't like thyme. For me, even though I say, oh, it has these medicinal properties, I don't like the taste of it. Why don't I like the taste of it? That's to be investigated, because when I look at thyme and I look at the crystalline structure of it, I get connected to dark energy. So thereby I don't ingest it, no matter how quote unquote nice it tastes. But this is again, in some other material where I talked about some of the higher order discernment faculties, they actually go with smell and taste. Because what tastes good or what smells good is tied into something we could say should be benevolent, where something that tastes bad or smells bad is something that is not working in our favor. Of course, this can go with belief systems and what we've been induced to believe. For instance, if you smoke cigarettes, people that are addicted to cigarettes, they think, oh, it smells so good, right? So we can't say that it goes right on. It has to be clear. We have to activate our higher order faculties to actually sense the true smell. And that is for people that's, for instance, perfume. People say, oh, it smells so good. For me, it smells disgusting because I can smell the rotten energy form behind the ones that are using the perfume, or the dark angelic that is present there, or the parasite that is cloaking itself in that perfume smell that bleeds through the artificiality of the perfume, especially now where everything has become chemically produced perfumes that ties up to all sorts of weird entities that are then connecting to people that are using perfume, and it creates a field around them from where they can affect other people with these energetic parasites, using the perfume field to be the medium of transport. So these are, again, some of the things that we need to look into when we talk about food and smells and discernment. And the reason why I'm getting a little bit stumped here is because I'm reaching the 45 minutes on this podcast. So I will continue in the next one. So for now, we'll stop here and continue the next podcast. Thank you.